I'm always intrigued when I come across a painting whose meaning isn't agreed upon by art historians. This is certainly the case with this mysterious painting by French baroque painter Nicolas Poussin. There are, however, several clues that give us hints, and if they are true, it's probably the most ambiguous painting I have ever seen. Known as A Dance to the Music of Time, the fact that the painting was known by another title for nearly 3 centuries just increases the mystery. The foreground of the composition is dominated by 4 dancing figures as a winged naked old man plays music on a lyre. There are 2 little children in both corners, one is holding an hourglass and another is blowing bubbles. This spectacle takes place as a chariot emerges in the sky, right above the 4 dancing figures. So what on earth is going on here? We'll have to take a closer look at all elements to find out. In this video, you'll not only learn all about the French painter of the work, but also how it came about and what it presumably represents. Let's first take a closer look at Nicolas Poussin, the French painter who lived and worked in Rome for the majority of his career. Born in Les Andelys, a small town in Normandy, France, he was a child prodigy who spent his adolescent years drawing and painting. His parents, however, didn't see much in a career as an artist, so he simply ran away to Paris in 1612, never to return to his home village again. Not much is known about his life in Paris, but he certainly studied in the studios of several established masters. When he met a man who worked at the court of Marie de Medici, the Queen of France at the time, an incredible door opened for him. He managed to sneak into the Palace of Luxembourg, and more specifically, the place where the French Queen held her art collection. There he came across the work of Raphael, the high Renaissance master who had a tremendous influence on his mature style. Not only that, it also made him determined to travel to Rome. That's where he could find the bulk of Raphael's collection, which was painted about a century earlier. Back in the 17th century, traveling from Paris to Rome wasn't merely a case of hopping onto the next plane to arrive a couple of hours later. He made 2 attempts, in 1618 and 1622, but only made it to Florence and Lyon respectively before returning back to Paris. Luckily for him, he started earning some commissions and used the money he made to make another attempt in 1624. When he arrived in the spring of that year, it must have felt like coming home for the 30-year-old Poussin. That's an easy statement to make because he only briefly returned to Paris in the early 1640s. He was so impressed that he stayed in Rome for the rest of his life, which lasted until 1665, about 4 decades later. He absolutely loved the colorful paintings of Raphael, but totally despised the works of Caravaggio, which he found too gloomy. His first years in Rome weren't very easy, as he became ill and his important patrons all left the city. He earned his first major commission in 1627, a painting titled The Death of Germanicus. This classical Baroque style was what his patrons loved at the time. In reality, he actually preferred to paint landscapes. You can see a glimpse of his personal preference in A Dance to the Music of Time, as it features a small landscape in the background. What I find pretty amazing about Nicolas Poussin is that he inspired 2 major art movements in the following centuries. Jacques-Louis David became the leading neoclassical artist of his time and was highly influenced by Poussin. The same applies to John Constable, the man who put landscape painting on the map when this genre was at an all-time low. As Poussin's career progressed, the figures in his painting became less and less prevalent. Eventually, they became nothing more than the equivalent of a footnote in a vast landscape. He left behind a legacy of at least 224 major oil paintings, which influenced painters of just about every century that followed. Of all his paintings, A Dance to the Music of Time was definitely his most fascinating work. Now, before I dissect this complicated painting, I want to elaborate on how it came about. It wasn't conceived by Nicolas Poussin himself, but by the man who commissioned it, named Giulio Rospigliosi. Although he became Pope Clement IX in 1667, this painting was completed about 3 decades earlier. We don't know exactly when it was commissioned and painted, but the best guess is sometime during the final years of the 1630s. The future Pope was a writer who probably wrote the first ever comic opera around the time he hired Poussin. Having his written explanation of this painting would surely have helped to figure out what he meant. Since this has been lost, we can only base our guess on the original title of the painting, which was related to the four seasons. This immediately brings our attention to the four dancing figures, which are likely allegorical representations of the four seasons. It's generally accepted that the figure at the rear, the only male dancer, is Autumn. He is depicted as Bacchus, best known as the god of wine, followed by winter, spring, and summer. Now here's where the plot gets interesting. According to Poussin's contemporary, Gian Pietro Bellori, these figures actually represent the various stages of the human condition. Bellori was a writer who wrote a book titled The Lives of Artists, which is pretty similar to Vasari's work a century earlier. According to him, Bacchus doesn't represent autumn, but poverty. He's followed by labor, which leads to riches and eventually pleasure. Indulging in pleasure, such as drinking too much wine, leads back to poverty, completing this paradoxical circle. Bellori also mentioned that the sculpture on the left side is an image of Bacchus as both a young and an old man. In conclusion, this is pretty much the visualization of the popular saying, living your life in seasons. This brings us to the bearded fellow playing the lyre in the bottom right corner of the painting. He seems to be having a good time as he's playing this musical instrument, which has been used for thousands of years. The little child sitting next to him gives us the main clue as to what he represents. He's likely the personification of time, as you can see the child holding an hourglass, a symbol often used in that sense. This is also why the painting's title was changed in the early 20th century. It's now a reference to the four figures dancing to the music played by this old man, or time. He seemingly stares at the sky above, and he has pretty good reasons for it too. Just look at the scene that is unfolding right above the heads of the four dancers. An immense chariot emerges, but in it a naked man who holds a big ring. Because the four dancers have been identified as the seasons and the old man as time, we can base our observations on this theory. The woman preceding the chariot, who is sprinkling flower petals, is likely Aurora, the goddess of dawn. The man inside the chariot could be Apollo, the sun god in ancient mythology, and the ring he's holding is a symbol of the zodiac. Finally, the other figures likely represent the hours of the day. Some of them near the chariot only partially appear. There's a reason for that because Poussin changed the composition radically after he completed the original version. A second tree emerged to the right of the four dancers, and it reached all the way to the chariot. For some reason, the painter removed this element. It's just another mystery that will likely never be solved in this very complex painting. To conclude this video, although we'll never know its complete story, we do know that the painting remained in the collection of the Rospigliosi family until the early 19th century. It was acquired by Joseph Fesch, the half-uncle of Napoleon Bonaparte, in the year 1806. His family owned up to 16,000 paintings throughout history, a number that makes the average museum mouth-watering. A large part was sold in Rome in 1845, and A Dance to the Music of Time was acquired by English aristocrat Richard Seymour Conway. It passed on to his son Richard Wallace, and his collection served as the base of the Wallace Collection in London, a museum that opened its doors in 1897. Not only is this museum free to visit, but you can also admire Poussin's mysterious work of art up close, and hopefully figure out what it truly